I often talk about being a survivor of domestic violence and an advocate for domestic violence survivors, and I've just been sitting here tonight thinking about the past because a lot of trauma has unfortunately resurfaced for me recently, and so I haven't been doing too well in that department. But I thought that I would just tell my story because I realized that it's been a while since I told my story about surviving domestic violence, and I don't know if I've ever really told the whole story, so I thought I would make a video about that, and maybe it'll make me feel better, and hopefully somebody out there that has experienced the same thing or is experiencing the same thing currently might find some comfort in knowing that they are not alone. When I was only 19 years old, I think I was just about to turn 20, I entered into a relationship with a man that was nearly 20 years older than me. I had known him since I was 18. This relationship lasted into my early 20s. Now, it's important to remember that this relationship didn't start off as abusive right away, at least not in an obvious way. It started off with him love bombing me. I didn't know that it was love bombing at the time, but I now recognize that is what it was, and him telling me that I was mature for my age and I was different than other girls my age, and I was more fun to be around than women his age. The abuse started off with verbal and emotional abuse, which is actually the forms of abuse that stick with me the most and I feel like have done the most damage to me. The manipulation, the gaslighting, it's something that still sticks with me to this day. And even though when we started dating, he was praising me for how mature I was for my age, he started to use my age against me. Whenever I had an opinion, whenever I spoke up about something he did that bothered me, he would use my age against me and tell me that I was too young to understand and that he had more experience than me. And abuse escalates in domestic violence situations, and it did. It escalated to physical abuse. Physical abuse in more than one way, and I'm not going to get into detail about that because it's a little bit triggering for me right now because a lot of trauma has been resurfaced lately, and I'm just gonna say the abuse escalated to physical abuse. And I still stayed in this relationship. And at this point, I was in my very early 20s. I might do a separate video on things that happened in the relationship that were abusive because I feel like that might be helpful to other survivors that might be going through the same thing to hear me say it and recognize, like, oh, that's happening to me as well, and it makes me feel unsafe. So I think I'm going to do a separate video on that. At a certain point, my health started to deteriorate very quickly. My hair was falling out, I wasn't sleeping, I lost a lot of weight, and I just felt sick all the time. I was getting terrible migraines, and I realized I was just always anxious when I knew I was going to see him, but I was still scared to leave. And a part of the reason I was scared to leave is because whenever I brought up the conversation, he would remind me of all these good memories that we had together. And he was right, we did have good memories together. And so I would gaslight myself and I'd be like, you know what? You are being dramatic just like he says you are. It's not that bad. And so I stayed. And I stayed until eventually he proposed to me. And I accepted. And I remember the day that I accepted the proposal, I went home and my mom saw my face and I just started crying. And she knew immediately and she's like, don't marry him. Because she knew. And my friends and my family, they knew. They had been trying to get me out of that relationship for a long time. Um, but seeing my mom cry like that is something I'll never forget. I told myself I wasn't going to cry for this video, but this is like a lot of really, really painful um, memories. Anyways, he wanted to start planning the wedding right away, and I stalled like crazy. I was using excuses. I was like, I just want to be able to tell all my family and all my friends first, personally. Um, and I was like, I want to take some time to enjoy this before we announce it. So we never actually like publicly announced our engagement because I was stalling so much. Um, because I was so scared and I wanted to end it and I just didn't know how. But he was planning our future. He was telling me this is how the wedding is gonna go. This is who is gonna marry us. And then he's like, and I think we should start having kids as soon as possible because you're like the perfect age to have children. And that really scared me because I don't want to have children. I have never wanted to have children. And he knew this. And it's like he never respected the fact that I said I don't want to have children. And he dated me knowing I didn't want to have children. And I have my reasons for why I don't want children, and I don't owe anybody those reasons, but I think I might do a separate video on that. I'm not gonna include it in this video because I'm already emotional and I don't want to cry again. Anyways, the pandemic was happening, and since I was working in healthcare at the time, I had some space away from him because I didn't want to expose anybody to possibly getting COVID, and he was being very careful about COVID, and so I had some space away from him. And this is when I was finally able to sit and realize that what I had been experiencing with him was not right. And my friends and my family, the warnings they had been giving me, I realized they were right. And so I ended the engagement. So we broke up. But that's not where this story ends, unfortunately, because he had me so manipulated that this man stayed in my life until last year, in the shadows, always. Messaging me, sending me letters, asking to get back together, telling me he changed. Even when I was in relationships with other people, he wouldn't respect that and he would constantly try to pressure me into getting back together with him, sending me stories, poems. I think I already mentioned this, letters. And eventually I found out he was doing all of this while dating another woman. And so I decided to reach out to this woman to warn her and tell her that this man was basically cheating on her. And that is when she blocked me and he blocked me, and we finally went no contact, which I now realize is the biggest blessing that has ever happened to me. Um, but the healing has been very difficult. It's been a lot. I've been in therapy for so long. I'm almost 30 now. I still have reoccurring nightmares about this man, and I promised myself after my relationship with him that I would never marry somebody, at least not a man. I'm lucky enough to have never experienced this type of abuse from any of the women I've been with, so I do have a lot of trauma associated with men. There are very few men that I trust, and if you are a man that I trust, I would take that as a compliment. This relationship that started when I was only 19 years old has affected pretty much every relationship I've had after it, and unfortunately has made me more vulnerable to getting into other abusive relationships because it's what I know. It's what I went through when I was so young. It makes me very sad that he stole so many years of my life from me and that it's still affecting me to this day. And I think that this is a very common feeling amongst survivors. I've spoken to a lot of domestic violence survivors and SA survivors in support groups and also online, and that's been very helpful for me. Feeling less alone has been so helpful for me, and so I hope that this video helps at least one person feel less alone. Also remember, the abuse isn't your fault. It's the abuser's fault. Anyways, that's a very short version of the story. I think I'll do more parts to this. Maybe it'll be a little series that I do. Um, Thank you for listening, and I hope that this helps one woman feel less alone.